The notification from the school appeared on my phone at 2:47 p.m., just as I was finishing a conference call with a client. Mrs. Peterson, please call regarding Jamie. Urgent, but not emergency. My heart still lurched despite the reassurance. Ever since losing my husband David 2 years ago, every unexpected message carried the weight of potential catastrophe. I called immediately. Mrs. Henderson, Jamie's second-grade teacher, answered on the first ring. Mrs. Peterson, thank you for calling back so quickly. Jamie is fine physically, but something happened today that's quite unusual, and I thought you should know right away. My hand tightened around the phone. What is it? During show and tell, several children were talking about their spring break trips. Jamie became very upset and insistent about something he saw on an airplane. He says he saw his father. The world seemed to tilt slightly. That's impossible. David died in a boating accident 2 years ago. I understand, and I'm so sorry to bring this up. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. But Jamie was extremely distressed. He said he saw his dad boarding a plane at the airport when you were traveling last week. He's been adamant about it all afternoon. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar ache of grief mixed with a mother's concern. Jamie had been only 5 when we lost David. The grief counselor had warned us that children sometimes manifest their loss in unusual ways. I'll talk to him. Thank you for letting me know. That evening, I found Jamie in his room, building something elaborate with his Legos. His dark hair fell across his forehead exactly the way David's used to, and my heart clenched. Hey, buddy, want to tell me about what happened at school today? He looked up at me with those serious brown eyes, so much older than 7 years should allow. You won't believe me. I sat down on the floor beside him, crossing my legs. Try me. When we were at the airport last week, going to see Grandma, I saw Daddy. I kept my voice gentle, reaching out to touch his small hand. Jamie, we've talked about this. Daddy died in an accident. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us because we miss someone so much. No, Mom. He pulled his hand away, frustration coloring his cheeks. It was really him. He was getting on a plane with a lady. She had yellow hair and she was laughing. He had a different haircut and his beard was gone. But it was Daddy. I know my own dad. The certainty in his voice gave me pause. Children. Jamie's age didn't usually maintain elaborate fantasies with this level of detail. Where exactly did you see him? At gate 17. We were walking to our gate, and I looked over and there he was. I tried to pull you to show you, but you said we had to hurry or we'd miss our flight. Remember? I did remember. Jamie had tugged on my arm insistently, trying to drag me in a different direction. I'd been harried, juggling our carry-ons, and worried about the time, and I dismissed it as typical childhood. Distraction. Jamie, even if you saw someone who looked like Daddy, it was Daddy. Why won't you believe me? Tears welled in his eyes, and I pulled him into my arms. Okay. I believe that you saw someone who looked like him. That must have been scary and confusing. I held him close, feeling his small body tremble. But even as I comforted him, a tiny seed of something uncomfortable planted itself in my mind. That night, after Jamie fell asleep, I found myself opening the laptop and staring at photos of David. The official story was that he'd taken the boat out alone for a fishing trip, something he did occasionally on weekends. His body was never recovered. The Coast Guard had searched for 3 days before declaring it a fatal accident. The boat had been found capsized 5 miles offshore, damaged against the rocks. I'd accepted it because what else could I do? The alternative was too horrible. That somewhere he was suffering, lost, needing help I couldn't provide. The death certificate had been issued after the standard waiting period. The life insurance had paid out. I'd built a new life for Jamie and me from the ashes of our old one. But now, looking at David's face in these photos, I remembered things I'd pushed aside in my grief. How distant he'd been in those last few months. How he'd suddenly become obsessive about his phone, taking calls in another room. The weekend fishing trip he'd planned with such unusual spontaneity. His insistence that I take Jamie to visit my mother that same weekend, something he'd never done before. Always complaining about being left alone. My sister Monica had suggested delicately that perhaps David had been having an affair. I'd refused to even consider it. David was steady, reliable, devoted. He'd been my college sweetheart, my best friend, the father who'd cried when Jamie was born. The idea of him betraying us was unthinkable. But 7-year-olds didn't usually fabricate such specific details about airports and gate numbers. I spent the next 3 days in a strange fugue state, going through the motions of work and motherhood while my mind spun in circles. Then, on Thursday morning, I made a decision. I called my old friend Ryan, who worked in IT security. We'd gone to high school together, and he owed me a favor from when I'd helped his sister with a messy divorce settlement last year. Pro bono work that had saved her thousands in legal fees. Ryan, I need help with something unusual, and I need you to be discreet. Sounds ominous. What's up? I explained about Jamie's sighting, keeping my voice clinical, as though I were discussing a case rather than my own potentially not dead husband. I need to know if there's any way to check airline manifests or airport security footage from that day. There was a long pause. Emma, do you understand what you're asking? If David is alive, that means I know what it means. Can you help me or not? Give me the details. Date, time, airport, gate, number. But Emma, this might be nothing. Kids see things. I know, but I need to be sure. If I don't check, I'll always wonder. It took Ryan 4 days. 4 days during which I barely slept, oscillating between certainty that this was a wild goose chase and a growing nauseating suspicion that my entire life for the past 2 years had been built on a lie. When he called, I was at my office, reviewing a contract. Emma, you need to sit down. I was already sitting, but I gripped the edge of my desk. Tell me. I pulled some strings, called in some favors I can never call in again. The security footage from that day, that gate, there was a man matching David's description. Different hair, clean-shaven. But, Emma, I ran it through facial recognition software. It's a 94% match. The room spun. Are you certain? I'm sending you the stills now. There's more. He was traveling under the name Marcus Thompson. I traced the credit card used to book the ticket. It links to an LLC registered in Delaware 2.5 years ago, 3 months before the accident. My laptop pinged with incoming files. With shaking hands, I opened them. The image was grainy but clear enough. A man in a navy blazer and khakis, boarding pass in hand, laughing at something the blonde woman beside him was saying. He was thinner than David had been, his hair shorter and darker, styled differently, no beard. But it was him. The way he stood, weight slightly on his left leg, the distinctive shape of his ear, visible even in the profile shot, the small scar on his right hand from when he'd cut himself fixing the deck. It was David. I made it to the bathroom before I vomited. When the heaving stopped, I sat on the cold tile floor, my mind refusing to process what this meant. David had faked his death. He'd abandoned his son. He'd left me to grieve, to struggle through the devastation, to hold Jamie while he cried for his daddy every night for months. And the insurance money? Oh God, the insurance payout. He'd let me file a false claim, making me an unwitting participant in fraud. The rage came then, white-hot and consuming. But underneath it was something worse, a bone-deep humiliation. How stupid had I been? How blind! Every time I defended him to Monica, every time I told Jamie what a good man his father was, every tear I'd shed at his memorial service, all of it built on an elaborate lie. I called Ryan back. I need everything you can find. Bank accounts, property records, employment history for Marcus Thompson. Everything. Emma, maybe you should go to the police. Not yet. I need to know the full scope of this first. If I go to the authorities now with just airport footage, he could disappear again. I need ironclad proof, and I need to understand why. Over the next 2 weeks, Ryan compiled a dossier that read like a thriller novel. Marcus Thompson had purchased a condo in Fort Lauderdale 3 months before David's death. He was employed by a marketing firm, his work history carefully constructed with fake references that would pass casual scrutiny. Bank accounts showed regular deposits, including a large sum right after the life insurance paid out, transferred through several shell companies but traceable if you knew what you were looking for. The blonde woman was named Vanessa Cortez. She'd been a paralegal at a firm David had worked with on a contract basis. They'd apparently been having an affair for at least a year before his disappearance. My hands shook as I read through the documents. The level of premeditation was staggering. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a calculated exit strategy. He'd been planning to abandon us for over a year, methodically setting up his new life while still kissing me goodnight, still reading bedtime stories to Jamie. Monica came over the evening I finished reading everything. I told her I needed to talk, and she'd arrived with wine and worry in her eyes. When I showed her the evidence, she went pale. "That son of a bitch, Emma, we have to call the police right now." "I will, but not yet." "What do you mean, not yet? He committed fraud. He abandoned his child. He's going to face consequences, Monica. I promise you. But if I move too quickly, a good defense attorney might find technicalities. I need to document everything perfectly. And I paused, not sure how to articulate what I was feeling. I need to understand. I need to know if there were signs I missed, if this was somehow my fault. "Stop that right now." Monica grabbed my hands. "None of this is your fault. He's a con artist and a coward, and you did nothing wrong." But late at night, I couldn't stop the thoughts. Had I been a bad wife? Too focused on my career? Not attentive enough? The rational part of my mind knew Monica was right, but grief and betrayal don't listen to reason. I continued working with Ryan, building an airtight case. We documented everything: the fake identity, the financial fraud, the paper trail of his planning. I consulted with a criminal attorney discreetly, someone outside my usual professional circle. She confirmed that what we had was solid, but suggested waiting for the right moment. If you can get him to return to a state where the statute of limitations hasn't expired, or catch him in an act that demonstrates ongoing fraud, the case becomes even stronger, she advised. That moment came 3 months after Jamie's initial sighting. Ryan discovered that Marcus Thompson had booked a flight to attend a marketing conference in Chicago, just 2 hours from where we lived. The conference was in 2 weeks. I made my decision. I would confront him face to face. I would look into the eyes of the man who destroyed our lives and demand answers. And then, only then, would I hand everything over to the authorities. The night before David's flight to Chicago, I barely slept. I'd arranged for Jamie to stay with Monica, telling her I had depositions all weekend. She looked at me with knowing eyes but hadn't argued. She knew I needed this closure, even if she worried about how I'd get it. I arrived at O'Hare 2 hours before David's flight was scheduled to land. I checked his itinerary. Ryan had access to everything now, and I knew he was booked on the 2:15 p.m. arrival from Fort Lauderdale. I positioned myself near the baggage claim for his terminal, wearing sunglasses and a hat, trying to look inconspicuous. When he appeared, walking down the escalator with a roller bag and that same easy confidence he'd always carried, I thought I might pass out. He was laughing at something on his phone, completely at ease in his stolen life. Vanessa wasn't with him. She'd apparently stayed in Florida. I waited until he collected his bag and headed toward the exit. Then I stepped directly into his path. "Hello, David." The way the color drained from his face would have been comical in any other circumstance. His eyes widened, darting around as if looking for an escape route. I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Marcus. Marcus Thompson. Yes, I know. I also know about the LLC in Delaware, the condo in Fort Lauderdale, Vanessa Cortez, and the $500,000 life insurance payout you helped yourself to. Should I go on? He'd always been a terrible liar. Despite apparently being an excellent con man, his face cycled through shock, fear, and then something that looked almost like resignation. "Emma, I can explain. You have exactly 5 minutes to tell me why. Why you destroyed your son. Why you made me believe you were dead. Why you threw away everything we had. Then I'm calling the police." We moved to a quiet corner near an unused gate. David, I couldn't think of him as Marcus, set down his bag and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it hurt. "I was drowning," he said finally. "The business I'd invested in went under. I owed money to people you don't say no to. I had debts you didn't know about, gambling debts, and they were threatening. So you faked your death? You abandoned your 7-year-old son?" 5. He was 5. And I thought it would be better for him to have a dad who was dead than one who was a failure, than one who'd brought danger to your doorstep. The justifications rang hollow. "You could have told me. We could have worked it out together. We could have filed for bankruptcy, gotten help." I was ashamed, his voice cracked. I'd lost everything. The business, the investments, the respect of everyone who mattered. And Vanessa, she understood. She didn't judge me. She offered me a way out. A way out that involved defrauding an insurance company and letting your wife think you were dead. Do you have any idea what that did to Jamie? He cried himself to sleep for months. He had nightmares. He asked me every single day when Daddy was coming home, and I had to tell him you were never coming back. David's eyes filled with tears. No, I'm sorry. I've lived with that guilt every day. Guilt doesn't bring back 2 years of your son's life. Guilt doesn't undo the trauma. And by the way, Jamie saw you at the airport 3 months ago. A 7-year-old recognized his father, while his mother was too busy to notice. That's how he ended up at his school's show and telling everyone he saw his dead dad on a plane. David went even paler. He saw me? He did. And unlike his mother, he didn't doubt what his eyes told him. So I started digging, and here we are. What are you going to do? I pulled out my phone, where I had already dialed the Chicago Police Department non-emergency number. What I should have done the moment I confirmed you were alive. I'm turning you in. You'll face charges for insurance fraud, identity fraud, and whatever else the prosecutors can make stick. You'll probably go to prison. You'll definitely have to repay the insurance money, plus penalties. Emma, please. We can work this out. I can pay you back. Just give me time. Time? You've had 2 years. You've had 2 years while I rebuilt our lives from nothing, while I held our son through his grief, while I worked overtime to keep us in our house because your death meant we lost your income. My voice was steady, cold. I'd shed all my tears already. This isn't about revenge, David. This is about justice. This is about making sure Jamie knows that people face consequences for their actions, that you don't get to just walk away from your responsibilities. I was trying to protect you. Don't you dare make this noble. You were protecting yourself, your ego, your pride. Everything else was collateral damage. I pressed the call button. David stood there, frozen, as I calmly explained the situation to the dispatcher. Within minutes, I could hear sirens. Airport security appeared first, then Chicago PD. I handed over the USB drive with all of Ryan's research. Copies, of course. I'd sent the originals to my attorney and the FBI's fraud division. David didn't run. Maybe he was tired of running, or maybe he finally understood there was nowhere left to go. As they handcuffed him, he looked at me one last time. Tell Jamie I'm sorry. You'll have to tell him yourself someday, if he ever wants to hear it. The aftermath was a media circus I hadn't anticipated. Local man arrested for faking death made regional headlines, then national ones. The story had everything the news cycle craved: fraud, betrayal, a grieving widow who turned detective, a child's innocent observation that cracked the case wide open. I gave one interview to a local reporter who promised to keep Jamie's identity protected. I wanted to control the narrative, to make sure the truth was clear. Then I stopped answering press calls and focused on what mattered. David was charged with insurance fraud, identity theft, and several other counts. The prosecution was aggressive. Cases like his set precedents and sent messages. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the insurance company wanted blood. They were facing their own scrutiny about how a fraud this blatant had slipped through. Vanessa Cortez, it turned out, had no idea about the fake death. She'd been told David was divorced, had met him only after his accident. When the truth came out, she left him immediately, cooperating fully with authorities in exchange for immunity. She'd been a dupe, just like me, though I found it hard to muster much sympathy for her. The money came back, most of it, anyway. David had spent about $100,000, but the insurance company recovered the rest from his accounts. They didn't pursue charges against me, accepting that I'd been an unknowing victim. The money went into a trust for Jamie's education, managed by my attorney. I wanted nothing to do with it beyond ensuring my son's future was secure. The hardest part was talking to Jamie. Monica and I sat him down one evening, and I explained as gently as possible that his father hadn't died in a boat accident, that he'd made bad choices and left us, and that what Jamie had seen at the airport was real. Jamie listened with those two old eyes, processing information no child should have to understand. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Is Daddy a bad person?" "No, baby. He's a person who did bad things. There's a difference." "Will I see him again?" "Someday, if you want to, but probably not for a long time. He's going to have to face consequences for what he did." Jamie nodded slowly. Then he climbed into my lap, even though he'd been insisting lately that he was too big for such things. "I'm glad you're my mom," he whispered. I held him close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, feeling the weight of him against my chest. I'm glad you're my son. And Jamie? You were so brave to tell the truth about what you saw, even when people didn't believe you at first. That's what heroes do. David's trial took place 8 months later. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Monica beside me. I wanted to see this through to the end. I needed to watch justice happen, to know that the system could still work. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically, the paper trail of fake identity creation, the affair with Vanessa, the staged boating accident. Investigators had determined he'd sabotaged the boat himself and swum to shore where Vanessa had picked him up. The calculated cruelty of letting his family believe he was dead. David's defense attorney tried to paint him as a desperate man driven to extremes by financial pressure. But the premeditation was too clear, the callousness too evident. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was harsh. Mr. Peterson, you didn't just commit fraud against an insurance company. You committed a profound betrayal against your wife and son. You stole 2 years of your child's life, 2 years he can never get back. You caused immeasurable emotional harm for purely selfish reasons. This court finds your actions reprehensible. David was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, followed by probation and full restitution to the insurance company. He'd also face civil suits. The insurance company was pursuing damages, and my attorney had filed on Jamie's behalf for emotional distress. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine. Monica linked her arm through mine. How do you feel? I considered the question. Tired, sad, but also free. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. The truth was, while I'd hoped for justice, I'd never really sought revenge. I hadn't wanted to destroy David. I'd wanted to protect Jamie and myself from the consequences of his choices. I'd wanted the truth to come to light because secrets have power, and I'd lived under the weight of his lies for too long. Karma, I'd learned, wasn't about divine retribution or cosmic scorekeeping. It was simpler than that. David's lies had always been unsustainable. His house of cards was always going to collapse. All I'd done was give it a nudge at the right moment. Life moved forward. Jamie started therapy to process what had happened, working with a wonderful child psychologist who specialized in family trauma. He had nightmares sometimes, but less frequently as time passed. He asked questions. Why did Daddy leave? Did Daddy love us? Was it because of something Jamie did? Each question was a knife to my heart, but I answered as honestly as I could, always reinforcing that none of this was his fault. My career, which I'd nearly neglected during the investigation, rebounded. The story had made me somewhat notorious in legal circles, and my practice saw an uptick in clients who'd faced similar betrayals. I found a niche representing victims of financial fraud, using my experience to fuel my advocacy. And slowly, very slowly, I started to heal. The anger faded first, replaced by a kind of sad acceptance. David had made his choices, and he was living with the consequences. That was enough. A year after the trial, Jamie asked if he could write his father a letter. We discussed it with his therapist, who thought it might be therapeutic if Jamie wanted to express his feelings. I helped him write it, tears streaming down my face as he carefully printed out his thoughts in his child's handwriting. Dear Dad, I miss you, but I'm also mad at you. Mom says you made bad choices. I wish you had made different ones. I hope prison isn't too scary. I'm in 3rd grade now, and I'm learning multiplication. Maybe when you get out, you can see my school projects. Love, Jamie. The innocence of it. The unearned forgiveness. The small hand reaching out across an unbridgeable gulf, it nearly broke me. But I sealed it and sent it, because it was Jamie's choice to make. David wrote back. His letter was full of apologies and regrets, explanations that would never be adequate. But he also told Jamie he loved him, was proud of him, hoped someday to earn the chance to be a father again. I read it first, then gave it to Jamie, who tucked it carefully into his desk drawer. Do you want to talk about it? I asked. Not really, but I'm glad I sent mine. 2 years after David's arrest, I stood in Jamie's room watching him pack for summer camp. He was 9 now, taller and more confident. The trauma of his father's betrayal had left scars, but he was resilient in the way children can be, bending without breaking. Mom, do you think you'll ever stop being mad at Dad? The question caught me off guard. I sat on his bed, considering my answer carefully. I'm not really mad anymore, sweetie. I'm sad about what happened, and I wish things had been different. But holding on to anger just hurts the person who's angry. Your dad is facing the consequences of what he did. That's enough for me. Is that like karma? Mrs. Chen talked about it in social studies. I smiled. Yes, something like that. Sometimes the universe has a way of balancing things out. But you helped. You found him. You made sure he had to face what he did. I helped the truth come out, but the consequences, those came from his own actions. All I did was refuse to let the lie continue. Jamie zipped up his duffel bag and turned to me. I'm glad you didn't give up. I'm glad you believed me about the airplane. I pulled him into a hug. This child who'd carried such enormous burdens with such grace. I will always believe you, Jamie. Always. That evening, after dropping Jamie at the bus for camp, I drove home through streets golden with late afternoon sun. Our house, the one I'd fought so hard to keep, stood solid and welcoming. Inside were photos of Jamie and me, adventures we'd had, a life we'd built from ruins. I thought about David sometimes, wondered if prison had changed him, if he understood the magnitude of what he'd lost. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. He'd become a chapter in our story, not the whole book. The truth had landed, just as heavily and inevitably as a plane touching down after a long flight, and in its wake, Jamie and I had found something David's lies could never provide: solid ground, built on honesty and resilience, where we could finally, truly begin to heal. 3 months later, I received a letter from David's attorney. He was requesting permission to have supervised visitation with Jamie once he was released. The request wasn't for 3 more years, but he wanted to start the process, to demonstrate to the parole board his commitment to rebuilding his relationship with his son. I set the letter aside and picked up the phone, calling Jamie at camp. When I explained the request, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Do I have to decide now? He asked finally. No, sweetie. We have lots of time to think about it. And whatever you decide, I'll support you. Okay, can I think about it? Of course. After we hung up, I sat with the letter in my hands. This, too, was part of karma's work. The slow, painful process of accountability and potential redemption. Whether David could truly change, whether he could ever be the father Jamie deserved, remained to be seen. But that would be Jamie's choice to make when he was ready. For now, we had peace. We had truth. We had each other. And sometimes, that was the greatest victory of all. I filed the letter carefully, then went to the kitchen to start dinner. Through the window, I could see our neighbors' kids playing in their yard, hear their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Life, in all its messy complexity, continued. And we were going to be okay. The karma that had brought David's lies crashing down hadn't been dramatic or supernatural. It had been simple, inevitable consequence meeting long overdue truth. A child's innocent observation, a mother's determination to believe him, and the unstoppable weight of reality asserting itself over fiction. David had thought he could escape his life, rewrite his story, disappear into a comfortable lie. But the truth, as it always does, had found a way to surface. Not because I was clever or vengeful, but because lies are houses built on sand, and eventually the tide comes in. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere, David was in a cell, living with his choices. Somewhere else, Jamie was probably roasting marshmallows and telling stories around a campfire, learning that life goes on even after betrayal, that joy can exist alongside pain. And here I was, in the home I'd saved, in the life I'd rebuilt, at peace with the journey that had brought me to this moment. Not because I'd sought revenge, but because I'd insisted on truth. Not because karma was magic, but because consequences were real. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't about watching someone fall. It was about standing firm on solid ground and refusing to build your life on someone else's lies. It was about protecting the innocent, a child who deserved better than a father who traded him for an escape route. The plane carrying David's fake life had finally landed, and in its place, Jamie and I had built something real, something true, something that would last. That was the real victory, not David's downfall, but our rise from the ashes of his betrayal. As I finished my tea and headed inside, I thought about courage, about a 7-year-old boy who'd insisted he'd seen his father when everyone told him it was impossible, about a mother who'd chosen to believe her son and follow that thread, no matter how painful the truth might be. And I thought about karma, that misunderstood concept. It wasn't magic or mysticism. It was simply this: the truth will out, lies unravel, and those who face reality with courage and honesty will always, eventually, find themselves standing on firmer ground than those who choose deception. David had made his choice. We'd made ours, and in the end, that made all the difference.